You are nothing. You were never anything. Now sign the papers and get out of my son's life forever." Claudia Harrington's voice cut across the Christmas table like a blade-cold absolute designed to kill. Then she did something nobody expected. She reached across and slapped the divorce papers directly onto Emily's plate, sending food scattering across the white linen in front of every investor, every business partner, every witness she had carefully assembled for exactly this moment. Emily's husband sat 3 feet away. He said nothing. He did not move. This is the story of the woman they publicly executed at Christmas dinner and the one phone call that buried everything the Harrington family ever built. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel, hit the bell, so you never miss a story like this one, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The snow had been falling over the Harrington estate since early afternoon. By the time dinner was served, it lay thick and quiet over the mountain property, blanketing the gardens, covering the stone walls, turning the whole world outside into something that looked peaceful and still. Inside it was anything but. Emily Whitmore, Emily Harrington. Now, though that name had never quite fit her the way she once hoped it would, stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the caterers arrange the last of the Christmas centerpieces. She had insisted on being involved with the decorations this year. She had spent 3 weeks sourcing the right candles, the right pine arrangements, the right shade of deep burgundy ribbon that Claudia had mentioned once in passing she preferred over red. 3 weeks. For a woman who would have dismissed the entire effort in 30 seconds if the ribbon had been one shade off. That was Emily's life inside the Harrington house, measured in small offerings that were never quite enough. She smoothed the front of her dress, a deep forest green she had chosen carefully, something elegant but not showy, something that would not give Claudia any reason to make one of her comments, and she told herself what she had been telling herself for 3 years. Tonight would be different. She believed it or she tried to. The way you try to believe in something long after the evidence has stopped supporting it, simply because the alternative is too painful to face. The Harrington Christmas dinner was not a family event. It never was. It was a performance. A showcase. 28 guests were seated that evening around a table that had been extended to its full length, dressed in white linen and crystals, surrounded by people whose names Emily had memorized, not because she cared about them, but because she knew what happened when she got one wrong. Claudia Harrington sat at the head of the table. She always sat at the head of the table, even in her son's home, even at his wife's Christmas dinner. Nobody had ever questioned this arrangement, not even Daniel, especially not Daniel. He sat to his mother's right, and Emily sat across from him far enough down the table that casual conversation required a raised voice. She had not arranged the seating this way. She had submitted her seating chart 3 days ago, and it had come back revised without explanation. She had not asked for an explanation. That was something she had learned early. Some battles cost more than they were worth. The first hour passed, the way these evenings always passed, in polished, careful conversation about business and travel, and the right kind of gossip, the kind that was dressed up in concern, but tasted like cruelty. Emily smiled when smiles were expected. She laughed quietly at the right moments. She refilled her water glass and said nothing when Leonard Ashford, one of Daniel's oldest business partners, spoke directly over her 3 times in a row as though she were not sitting right there. She had learned that too. Across the table, Daniel was animated and confident the way he only ever was in rooms full of people who admired him. He had a particular laugh he used in public, bigger than his real one, looser, somehow designed to fill space and invite others into it. Emily used to love that laugh. In the early days before she understood the difference between the man he was in public and the man he was alone with her, she had thought that laugh was the truest version of him. She understood now that she had been wrong. The meal moved through its courses. The caterers were excellent. The wine was chosen by Claudia, and was, as Claudia made a point of mentioning twice, from a vineyard she had visited personally last spring in Tuscany. Emily ate. She answered questions when they were directed at her. She remained present and polite, and utterly invisible. And then Claudia set down her fork. It was a small gesture, the sound of silver against china in the middle of 28 conversations. But Emily noticed it. She noticed everything about Claudia, the way prey learns to notice every movement of the thing that hunts it. Claudia touched the side of her wine glass with one finger, and the table began to quiet. She had that kind of authority, the room reshaping itself around her will without her having to ask twice. Before dessert, Claudia said, her voice carrying easily to every corner of the room. "I'd like us to take a moment for something rather important." Emily looked up. Daniel was not looking at her. That was the first sign. The first real sign, the kind that reaches through your chest and grabs something vital and squeezes. Daniel was looking at the tablecloth. "Our family has always believed in honesty," Claudia continued, "even when honesty is difficult, even when the timing is imperfect, because some things cannot wait and some truths are too important to protect people from." Emily's hands were in her lap. She pressed them flat against her thighs. "Daniel," Claudia said, and Daniel stood up. He did not look at his wife. He stood with his shoulders squared and his jaw set, and he reached into his jacket pocket, and he pulled out a white envelope, and he leaned across the corner of the table and placed it in front of Emily without making eye contact. The room was completely silent now. Emily looked at the envelope, then she looked at her husband. "Daniel," she said, quietly, just his name. "Emily." His voice was careful, rehearsed. She could hear the rehearsal in it, the places where the natural hesitation had been coached out. "I think we both know that our marriage hasn't been what either of us needed it to be." Something cold moved through her. Not surprise exactly, something closer to recognition. The feeling of watching a thing you half expected finally arrive. "I don't know that," she said. "Please open the envelope." "Daniel." "Open the envelope, Emily," Claudia's voice from the head of the table. Not loud, just absolute. Emily looked at her mother-in-law for a long moment. Then she looked back at the white envelope sitting on the white linen in front of her. She reached out and picked it up. She opened it carefully, the way she did everything, without rushing, without showing more than she chose to show. Inside were divorce papers, 12 pages, tabbed for signatures, already notarized in 3 places. She turned the pages slowly. She read the language, the legal description of their marriage as a union that had irretrievably broken down. The proposed settlement, a figure that was, she noted with a strange calm detachment, insulting. Barely 3 years of her life, the cooking and the organizing and the quiet absorbing of every piece of cruelty this family had directed at her, reduced to a number that assumed she had nowhere else to go. "I think," Daniel said, still not looking at her, "that this is the right decision for both of us." "You think?" "Emily, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." She looked up at him then, studied his face, the face she had chosen, the face she had trusted. She was looking for something, some crack in the performance, some sign of the man she had married underneath the man currently standing in front of her, reading from a script his mother had written. She found nothing. That was perhaps the most painful moment of the entire evening. Not the envelope, not the papers, not the audience of 28 people who were all very carefully not looking at her. The nothing. The complete and total absence of the person she thought she knew. "Why here?" she asked. "Why tonight? Why in front of all of these people?" Because I wanted it this way." Claudia spoke before Daniel could finish. She did not apologize for the interruption. She never apologized for anything. "Because, Emily, I know you. I've watched you for 3 years. And I know that given the opportunity to handle this privately, you would have dragged it out for months. You would have made it messy. You would have made Daniel feel guilty for making a decision that is frankly long overdue." Emily kept her voice very steady. "You planned this. I facilitated a conversation that needed to happen. At Christmas dinner, with his business partners present. The timing was not ideal, I admit, but the decision itself has been a long time coming." Claudia folded her hands on the table in front of her, the picture of composed authority. "You are a lovely person, Emily, but you are not what this family needs. You were never what this family needed." The silence in the room was absolute. Emily set the divorce papers down on the table very carefully. She looked at her husband. "Is this what you want, Daniel?" "Emily, answer the question. Not what your mother wants, not what makes sense strategically for your business. What do you want?" Daniel opened his mouth, and then someone at the far end of the table moved. A woman stood. She had been seated near the corner, far enough away that Emily had not focused on her, particularly there were so many guests, so many faces. But now she was standing, and Emily looked at her, and the world rearranged itself around a single cold fact: Victoria Langley. She was exactly as beautiful as Emily had heard. Tall, poised, with the particular kind of confidence that comes not from earning anything, but from never having been told you couldn't have it. Her father was Senator Robert Langley. Her family was old money and political power, and exactly the kind of social elevation the Harrington family had been reaching toward for years. Emily had known about Victoria. Of course she had. You don't spend 3 years in a family like the Harringtons without learning which ghosts they keep. But she had never imagined, even in her most frightened moments when she lay awake listening to Daniel's breathing and wondering how much longer she could do this, she had never imagined they would bring Victoria here, tonight, to this table. "I think," Claudia said, watching Emily's face with the careful attention of someone who has planned for every reaction and found them all satisfying, "that it would be good for you to meet Victoria properly. She and Daniel have reconnected recently. It became clear to all of us that they have a future together that is very well suited." Victoria looked at Emily with something that was not quite pity and not quite triumph, something in between. "I'm sorry for the circumstances," Victoria said. Her voice was warm, practiced. "Truly." Emily said nothing. "Victoria's father has some business interests that align very naturally with what Daniel is building," Claudia continued. "The Langley connection will open doors for this family that have been—" She paused, choosing her word with visible satisfaction, "inaccessible." Emily understood now. She understood completely. She was not being divorced because the marriage had broken down. She was being traded. Her husband was being handed to a more useful woman, the way you reassign a resource that isn't performing to its potential, and the Christmas dinner with its 28 witnesses and its white linen and its candles. Emily had spent 3 weeks sourcing, was not a family gathering. It was a signing ceremony, and she was the only one who hadn't received the agenda. "Sign the papers, Emily," Daniel's voice, quiet now. The rehearsal stripped back to something that was almost real. "Please, let's not do this in front of everyone." "You brought everyone here," she said. "That wasn't—" "You brought everyone here," she said again, and her voice was perfectly level. "And you put those papers in front of me, in front of your investors and your colleagues and your new—" She glanced at Victoria, a single measured look, arrangement. "So don't ask me to make it easier for you." Claudia set her hands flat on the table. "Emily, I'm not finished." Claudia blinked. It was a tiny reaction, barely visible. But it was the first time in 3 years that Emily had interrupted her, and they both knew it. 3 years, Emily said. 3 years in this family. I cooked for your events. I managed your charity commitments when you were traveling. I sat in hospital waiting rooms while Daniel had his procedures, and I never called my own family because Daniel asked me not to, and I thought that was loyalty. I thought that was what marriage asked for. She looked at Daniel. "I thought you asked for it because you trusted me, because you wanted me close. I understand now that you asked for it because it was more convenient to keep me isolated." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not— Don't." Her voice did not rise. It was somehow more effective for staying exactly where it was. "Don't tell me what it was and wasn't. I was there." Claudia recovered herself. She picked up her wine glass with the controlled elegance of someone who has weathered many uncomfortable conversations and emerged superior from all of them. "There is one more thing," she said, "that I think you should see before you make any decisions about how to proceed tonight." She nodded to someone near the doorway. One of the staff— no, not staff, Emily realized. A man she didn't recognize, sharply dressed, carrying a thin folder. He crossed the room and set the folder in front of Emily. Inside were photographs. Emily's hands went still. The photographs were designed to look like surveillance images, grainy in that deliberate way that says captured rather than staged. They showed Emily in what appeared to be a private conversation with a man Emily had never met in a restaurant Emily had never visited. The composition was intimate. The angle was damning. They were fabricated. She knew they were fabricated because she knew every hour of her own life, and none of these hours had happened. But that wasn't the point. The point was that 28 people were sitting at this table, and 28 people were now going to wonder. "We don't intend to use these publicly," Claudia said, her tone warm with false magnanimity. "That's not our intention at all, but it seemed important, given the conversation we're having tonight, that everyone understand the full picture." "These are fake," Emily said. "Of course you'd say that." "They are fabricated. That man in those photographs is someone I have never met. I have never been to that restaurant. These images were manufactured. Emily, I want to be very clear." She looked around the table, at the investors, at the business partners, at the carefully assembled audience. "I want every single person in this room to hear me say it once plainly and without hesitation. Those photographs do not depict anything that happened. They are lies." The silence was different now, not the satisfied silence of earlier, something less certain. "Sign the papers," Claudia said. Her voice had changed, fractionally, a degree colder. "Take the settlement and move on with your life. This doesn't have to become uglier than it already is." Emily looked at the papers, then at Claudia, then at Daniel. Daniel was looking at the tablecloth again. She picked up the divorce papers. She held them for a moment. Then she set them back down on the table and pushed them slowly back toward her husband. "No," she said. The word fell into the room like a stone dropped into still water. "Excuse me," Claudia said. "I will not sign documents created from lies." Emily's voice remained exactly what it had been, even, clear. "I will not accept a settlement designed to make this easier for you rather than fair for me. And I will not sign anything tonight at this table in front of these people because this is not a legal proceeding. This is theater, and I am done being your audience." She stood. The movement was calm and unhurried. She reached up to the back of her neck and unclasped the necklace she was wearing, a Harrington family piece, gold and diamonds, the kind of thing that had been described to her on more than one occasion as an honor to wear. She laid it on the table beside the divorce papers. She picked up her water glass, took one final sip. Then she looked at Daniel. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said. "I mean that. I genuinely hope you find it." He finally looked up at her, and in that moment, just that moment, she saw something move across his face, something that might have been regret, or might have been fear, or might have been both wrapped around each other so tightly they were indistinguishable. "Emily, take care of yourself, Daniel." She walked away from the table. Claudia's voice followed her, sharp now, the smoothness gone. "You walk out of this house tonight and the settlement offer disappears. You understand that you leave now, and you leave with nothing." Emily did not stop walking. "This is not how reasonable people behave," Claudia's voice rising fractionally, the controlled surface showing its first real crack. "Emily, Emily, I am talking to you." Emily reached the doorway. She did not look back. Behind her, the room erupted in the kind of low, urgent conversation that people have when they are trying to sound calm while actually being very rattled. She heard Victoria say something in a tone of careful concern. She heard one of the investors laugh, short and uncomfortable. She heard Daniel say her name once more quietly to a room she was no longer in. She walked through the hallway, past the Christmas tree she had decorated, past the photographs on the wall that did not include a single image of her, past the coat rack where her winter coat hung exactly where she had left it. She put on her coat. She opened the front door. The cold hit her immediately, that deep mountain cold that is not just temperature, but presence that moves through fabric and skin and gets into your bones before you can stop it. The snow had not let up. It fell in thick, slow curtains across the darkness. She stood on the front steps of the Harrington estate, and she breathed. One breath, 2, 3. In the 3 years she had lived with these people, she had never cried in front of them. She had come close. There were moments when the pressure behind her eyes was so strong she could feel it in her temples, but she had never let them see it. She had kept that for herself, those few private minutes in a bathroom or a car with the windows fogged, and she had always gathered herself back together and returned. She was crying now. Not great heaving sobs. It was not that kind of crying. It was quieter than that. The kind of crying that happens when something you have been holding for a very long time finally loses its grip. The kind that feels less like falling apart and more like setting something down. She reached into her coat pocket. Her fingers closed around a phone. Not her everyday phone, an old one. A model from years ago, the kind she had stopped using when she changed her number, when she had started building the life she wanted to build on her own terms. She had kept this phone charged all this time, carried it with her without quite letting herself think about why. She knew why. She had always known why. She looked at it for a long time. 3 years ago, she had made herself a promise. She had walked away from her father's world deliberately, purposefully, because she needed to know who she was outside of it. She needed to find out whether the people in her life were there for her or for what came with her. She had kept that promise even when it was hard, even when the Harrington family treated her with contempt that had a certain precise quality to it, the contempt of people who believe they have correctly identified someone as being beneath them. She had kept the promise. She had never once called. She stood in the snow outside the house that had never been her home, holding a phone she had carried for 3 years without using, and she thought about the photographs on the table inside, the fake ones, the fabricated evidence that Claudia had casually presented to 28 witnesses as though it were simply another course to be served alongside the Christmas dessert. She thought about Daniel's face when he looked at the tablecloth instead of at her. She thought about 3 years of dinners and charity events and hospital waiting rooms. She opened the phone. She found the number she had not dialed in 3 years. She pressed call. It rang once. The voice that answered was not groggy or surprised. It was immediate alert, the voice of a man who had been waiting for this call for a very long time and had never quite managed to stop. Emily. She closed her eyes. Dad, she said, and something inside her chest, something that had been drawn tight for 3 years, like a wire wound past its tolerance, finally and completely released. Emily. His voice changed. Just the one word, her name, but the texture of it shifted in a way she hadn't heard since she was very young. What happened? She opened her mouth to say something measured and controlled, something that would give him the facts without the weight of everything she had been carrying. What came out instead was the truth. They served me divorce papers at the Christmas dinner, she said, in front of everyone. Daniel's mother had fake photographs made. There was a woman there, his old girlfriend, and they've already planned it, all of it, and they wanted me to sign tonight and leave with nothing. And Dad, I just walked out. I'm standing in the snow outside the house, and it is so cold, and I don't know what to... Emily. What? Are you safe? She laughed. It surprised her. Yes, I'm safe. Are you physically safe right now? That's all I need to know first. Yes, Dad. I'm fine. I'm standing outside. I'm not hurt. Okay. A pause. Not a hesitant one, a gathering one. Then come home. She almost said something. Almost explained again why she couldn't, why it would mean admitting something she wasn't ready to admit, why Emily. His voice was the steadiest thing she had heard all evening, steadier than her own had been. Come home. She looked up at the snow falling in the dark. 3 years ago, she had left to find out who she was. She knew now. She was someone who had cooked and organized and managed and stayed and held herself together in a house where she was despised, and she had done all of it with dignity, and she had walked out of that house tonight without breaking and without begging and without signing a single thing that was designed to diminish her. She knew exactly who she was. Okay, she said. She heard her father exhale. I'll have a car there in 40 minutes, he said. Don't go back inside. I wasn't going to. Good. A beat. Emily. Yeah. I've been waiting for this call for 3 years. She pressed her free hand over her eyes. I know, Dad, she said. I know. Inside the mansion, behind her, through the thick front door and the thick walls and the accumulated weight of everything that had happened tonight, the Harrington family was celebrating. She could not hear it, but she knew it was happening. They had done what they came to do. They had handed their son to a better alliance, neutralized the inconvenient wife, and put fabricated evidence on the table as insurance against any inconvenient pushback. They had done all of it cleanly in front of witnesses on Christmas Eve. They were satisfied. They had absolutely no idea that the woman standing in the snow 40 feet from their front door had just made one phone call, and that one phone call was about to change everything they thought they controlled. She slipped the old phone back into her pocket. She pulled her coat tighter against the cold, and she waited. The car arrived in 38 minutes. Not 40, 38. Emily noticed that. Standing in the snow outside the Harrington estate, her wrist still aching where Claudia had grabbed her during the chaos after she walked away from the table, she noticed that her father had shaved 2 minutes off his own estimate, because that was Nathan Whitmore. When he said something would happen, it happened faster than promised. She had forgotten that about him. She had forgotten a lot of things about the world she came from. 3 years inside the Harrington family had a way of narrowing your sense of what was possible. You stopped expecting things to arrive on time. You stopped expecting things to arrive at all. The driver did not speak to her beyond confirming her name. He held the door open, waited until she was settled, and pulled away from the estate without looking back. Emily looked back. She looked at the lit windows of the house, the warm gold glow behind the glass, the silhouettes of people still moving inside, still at the table probably, still finishing dessert, still talking in that particular low, urgent register that meant the entertainment portion of the evening had concluded, and now they were processing what they had witnessed. She turned away and faced forward. Her wrist throbbed. She pressed her other hand over it and breathed through the pain and did not think about Claudia's face when she had grabbed her. The absolute certainty in that grip, the confidence of a woman who had never once been stopped from taking what she wanted. She thought instead about the road ahead and the city at the end of it, and a building she had not entered in 3 years. Her phone rang. The old one, the one she had used to call her father. She answered without checking. "You left." It was Daniel. His voice had lost the rehearsed quality entirely. What remained was something rawer, something that sounded almost like panic. "Emily, you actually left." "Yes," she said. "I did." "Where are you? You can't just— my mother is furious. She's saying things about what she's going to do, and I need you to come back and talk to her before this gets worse." Emily listened to that sentence all the way to the end. "Before this gets worse," she repeated. "Emily, Daniel, your mother grabbed my wrist hard enough to bruise it. Your family served me fabricated photographs over Christmas dinner. You stood in front of your investors and told me our marriage was a mistake, while your new girlfriend sat at my table." She kept her voice completely even. "Tell me what worse looks like from where you're standing. I'd genuinely like to know." Silence. "I didn't know she was going to grab you," he said finally. "I want you to know that. That wasn't part of the plan." More silence. "There was a plan, Daniel." She said it softly, almost gently. Not because she felt gentle, because she was past the point where volume changed anything. "I know there was a plan. I know it has been in motion for a while. I know Victoria's father has something your company needs. I know your mother decided months ago that I was an obstacle to be removed. I'm not asking you to confess. I'm just telling you that I understand what happened tonight. Emily, if you would just come back and let us talk through this properly. There is nothing to talk through." She looked out the window at the dark, passing landscape. The snow-covered trees caught briefly in the headlights and then swallowed back into dark. "Goodbye, Daniel." She ended the call. He called back twice. She did not answer. On the third call, she turned off the old phone entirely and slipped it back into her pocket and sat with the quiet for the rest of the drive. It took 2 hours to reach Denver. The car pulled up in front of a building in the downtown financial district, glass and steel, and 42 floors of it. A building Emily had grown up visiting, a building whose lobby she knew better than any other place in the world. The concierge recognized her before she was fully through the door. His face went through several things very quickly, surprise, then a kind of careful neutrality, then something warmer that he did not quite allow himself to show. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, then corrected himself immediately. "I'm sorry, Mrs. "Whitmore is fine," Emily said. "It was always fine." He nodded. "Your father is upstairs. He said to send you directly." She took the private elevator, the one that required a code she still remembered without thinking, a 6-digit sequence that her father had never changed, because he was not a man who changed things unnecessarily. The elevator moved fast and smooth and opened directly into the top-floor residence. Nathan Whitmore was standing in the middle of the room waiting for her. I was 63 years old, and he looked exactly as she remembered, which was to say, he looked like a man who had built something from nothing and carried the weight of that knowledge in his posture without being crushed by it. He was not a soft man, but he was not a cold one either. He was the kind of man who understood that strength and warmth were not opposites. He had tried to teach her that. She had learned it eventually, just not in the way he expected. He looked at her face. Then he looked at her wrist where she was still pressing her opposite hand over the bruising. Something moved through his expression. "Let me see," he said. "Dad, Emily, let me see." She held out her wrist. He looked at it for a long moment without speaking. His jaw was very still. That stillness was something she remembered too. Nathan Whitmore did not get loud when he was angry. He got quiet. The louder the silence, the worse the anger underneath it. This was a very loud silence. "Sit down," he said finally. "I'll get ice. Dad, it's fine. I don't need—" "I know you don't need it. Sit down anyway." She sat. He came back with ice wrapped in a cloth and sat across from her and watched her press it to her wrist without speaking for a moment. "Tell me everything," he said, "from the beginning. Don't leave things out to protect me." So she did. She told him about the Christmas dinner and the guest list and the seating chart that came back rearranged. She told him about Claudia's announcement and Daniel standing up and the envelope and the 12 tabbed pages inside it. She told him about Victoria Langley standing up at the far end of the table and Claudia explaining the strategic advantages of the Langley connection with the tone of someone presenting a business case rather than dismantling a marriage. She told him about the photographs. Nathan's stillness intensified when she got to the photographs. She watched his hands on the armrests of his chair. They did not grip. They simply rested, very still, very controlled. Fabricated, he said. It was not a question. Completely. The man in the photographs is someone I've never met. The restaurant doesn't look like anywhere I've ever been. They were professionally done, but if you looked at them carefully, the lighting was wrong in one corner. I noticed it right away. You noticed it right away, he said with a particular quality in his voice. I've had 3 years to learn how that family operates, she said. You look for what's slightly off. Nathan said nothing for a moment. And Daniel, he said. Where was Daniel when his mother was presenting fabricated evidence against his wife? Emily looked at the ice pack on her wrist. He was looking at the tablecloth. The silence was enormous. I see, Nathan said. Those 2 words in that particular tone carried more weight than a sentence 10 times longer would have. He stood. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her for a moment, looking out at the city lights below the snow still falling soft and thick outside the glass. I owe you an apology, he said. She blinked. What? He turned to face her. When you told me 3 years ago that you were marrying Daniel Harrington, I had concerns. You know I had concerns. But I expressed them in the wrong way. I made it feel like I was questioning your judgment instead of protecting you, and you pulled away because of that, and I let you pull away because I thought the distance would bring you back faster than pursuing it would. He paused. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Emily felt something shift in her chest. Dad, I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm just saying it because it needed to be said before we talk about what comes next. She looked at him for a long moment. Her father, the man she had spent 3 years proving herself independent from, never quite understanding that he had never needed the proof. I forgive you, she said. I already forgave you. I was just too proud to call. He nodded once, moved back to his chair and sat down. All right, he said. Now tell me about the settlement offer. She told him the number. His eyebrows rose fractionally. That was significant. Nathan Whitmore was not a man whose eyebrows moved for small reasons. That is, he said carefully, a remarkable insult. It assumes I have no leverage and no options. They believed that. They've believed that for 3 years. That's what made the marriage easy enough to manage. They thought I needed them more than they needed me. Nathan looked at her for a moment with something in his expression she couldn't quite read, something that was almost admiration, which surprised her because her father's admiration was not a thing she had ever been able to predict. You said no, he said. I said no. In front of 28 witnesses. In front of 28 witnesses. He was quiet for a moment. Then very unexpectedly he smiled. It was a small smile, brief, but it was real. Your grandfather, he said, would have loved you. She did not know exactly why that broke her open. Of all the things said to her tonight, that was the one that broke her. She pressed her hand over her eyes and breathed through it, and her father sat across from her and did not move to embrace her, and did not speak, which was exactly the right thing to do. He knew her well enough to know she needed to get through it on her own terms. She got through it. Okay, she said, finally lowering her hand. What happens now? Nathan leaned back. Now, he said, we let them have tonight. They're celebrating. Let them celebrate. He picked up the small glass on the table beside him. Water, not alcohol. Nathan Whitmore did not drink when he was thinking seriously about something, and turned it slowly in his hands. Tomorrow morning some people are going to start receiving phone calls. What kind of people? The kind whose phone calls matter to Daniel Harrington's business. He set the glass down. I'm going to be very clear about something, Emily. I am not going to do anything illegal. I'm not going to do anything unethical. I'm simply going to make some business decisions that I should have made years ago and chose not to make out of respect for your wishes. What decisions? He met her eyes directly. Whitmore Global has a significant portfolio of investments. Some of those investments overlap with Harrington Realty's financing structures in ways that the Harrington family has never fully understood because they never thought to ask where their backing actually came from. Emily went still. What are you saying? I'm saying that when your mother and I were concerned about you marrying into that family, I looked very carefully at the Harrington finances. I looked at who held their debt and who sat on their lending relationships and who their investors trusted. And then quietly over the following 18 months, I positioned Whitmore Global in places that gave us a view of that entire structure. The room was absolutely silent. "Dad," she said slowly, "how much of a view?" He looked at her steadily. "Enough," he said. "I never used it. I made myself a promise that if you were happy, I would never use it. I kept that promise for 3 years. He paused. "You are not happy." Emily sat with that for a moment. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I need you to understand that. I walked out of that house tonight, and I meant what I said to Daniel. I'm not doing this from a place of wanting to hurt anyone. I know. I want what's fair. I want the truth to be on record. I want those photographs neutralized before they can use them." "Understood. And I want—" She stopped, breathed. "I want it to be known who I am, not because I want their respect, but because they used my anonymity as a weapon against me, and I am done letting that weapon exist." Nathan nodded slowly. "Then we start tomorrow," he said. "Tonight you sleep." She almost laughed. "I don't think I can sleep." "Try anyway." He stood. "There's a room ready. It's been ready for 3 years." She looked at him. "You kept a room ready." "The whole time," he said simply, without any particular emphasis, as though it were the most natural thing in the world, which she understood now it was. She stood, crossed the room, and she hugged her father properly for the first time in 3 years. He wrapped his arms around her and held on with the steady, uncomplicated solidity of someone who had never stopped waiting for exactly this moment. "I'm sorry I didn't call sooner," she said into his shoulder. "You called when you were ready," he said. "That's enough." She pulled back, wiped her face, squared her shoulders. "What time tomorrow?" she said. 7. "I'll be up at 6. Something moved through his eyes, that admiration again clearer this time. "I know you will," he said. She went to the room that had been waiting for her. She lay down on the bed in the dark, and she thought about everything the way you do when your mind is too full to stop circling through the evening in fragments. Claudia's voice, Daniel's silence, the photographs on the table, Victoria's carefully warm apology, the cold outside the door, the sound of her father's voice saying her name on the other end of the line. She thought about the settlement offer, that insulting number, the assumption baked into it that she would be grateful for anything, that she would take what she was given and disappear quietly. She thought about Claudia's voice saying, "You are not what this family needs," saying it publicly, in front of everyone, with the satisfaction of someone who had been wanting to say it for years and had finally manufactured the right occasion. She thought about Daniel looking at the tablecloth, and she felt something clarify inside her. Not anger exactly, something cleaner than anger, something that did not need to be fed or managed or carefully contained. Certainty. She was certain lying there in the dark in her father's house that the Harrington family had made a mistake, not because she was going to hurt them, but because they had spent 3 years believing they understood exactly what she was and what she was capable of and exactly how much she needed them. And they had been wrong about all of it. She slept. In the Harrington estate, no one was sleeping. Claudia had dismissed the remaining guests by 10 o'clock, sending them off with smooth apologies about family matters and assurances that the evening's unpleasantness was already being handled. She was very good at sending people away, feeling like they had witnessed something exclusive rather than something disastrous. But once the guests were gone, the house changed. Daniel sat in the study with a glass he had refilled twice and his phone face down on the desk beside him. He had stopped calling Emily after the 3rd attempt. He did not know exactly what he was feeling, which was itself uncomfortable because Daniel Harrington was a man who prided himself on knowing exactly what he felt and why and what to do about it. What he felt right now, sitting in the study, while his mother moved through the house with the crisp efficiency of someone completing a project, was something he did not have a clean name for. Victoria had left an hour ago. She had kissed him on the cheek at the door and told him he had done the right thing and that she would see him in the new year. She was composed and warm and said all the right things. He had watched her car pull away and felt absolutely nothing. "Stop looking at your phone." Claudia appeared in the doorway. She had changed out of her dinner dress and was now in a silk robe, her composure perfectly intact, a small glass in her own hand that she held with the casual elegance of someone who had been at ease in these moments her entire life. "It's done. She'll get a lawyer, she'll negotiate, she'll sign eventually. Women like Emily always do." "Women like Emily," Daniel repeated. "Without resources, without options." Claudia settled into the chair across from him. "She has no money of her own. She has no career to speak of. Her family, whatever's left of it, isn't in any position to support a prolonged legal battle. She'll come to her senses within the week." Daniel looked at his glass. "She didn't seem like someone without options," he said quietly. Claudia looked at him with the precise patience of someone managing a person they consider essentially manageable. "She's upset. People say things when they're upset. Tomorrow she'll wake up cold and alone, and she'll realize the only sensible path forward is the one we've already prepared for her." He nodded. But something about the way Emily had stood up from that table sat in his chest, like a piece of glass, small and insistent, the kind you don't notice until it moves. She had not cried. He had expected her to cry. He had steeled himself against her. Crying had prepared for the guilt of it, had told himself that the temporary pain of this moment was the cost of a better future. He had built his entire internal architecture for this evening around managing her distress. She had not been distressed. She had been calm. Not the brittle surface-level calm of someone holding themselves together. Something else. Something underneath. Something that now that he was sitting alone in the quiet with his refilled glass, he was having trouble not thinking about. She had looked at him before she left, that last look. He had told himself for months that he had fallen out of love with Emily, that the marriage had simply run its course, that Victoria represented a future that Emily, through no fault of her own, simply couldn't offer him. He had told himself these things so many times they had taken on the weight of fact. Now, sitting alone while his mother told him what Emily would do next, he was less certain about all of it than he had been since the plan began. "The photographs," he said. "Was that necessary?" Claudia set down her glass. "Yes." "She said they were fake." "Of course she said that." "They are fake, Mother. They are a precaution." Her voice was pleasant and immovable. "If she attempts to drag this out through the courts, those images complicate her narrative. They give our lawyers something to work with. They keep her from becoming a sympathetic figure in proceedings that don't need to become complicated. She told everyone in the room they were fabricated, in front of the investors. And nobody believes the person denying the photographs," Claudia said. "That's rather the point." Daniel said nothing. "Go to bed, Daniel," his mother said. "This time tomorrow it will look very different. It always does." He went to bed. But he lay awake for a long time, thinking about Emily standing in the cold outside the front door, her phone pressed to her ear, talking to someone in a voice too low to hear. He found himself wondering, not for the first time and not idly, who Emily had called. He did not know. That not knowing was the piece of glass in his chest working its way deeper. By 6, the next morning, Emily was dressed, and at the small table in her father's residence with a coffee she'd made herself and a legal pad covered in handwriting. She had been awake since 5. She had used the hour to think, to write, to organize the past 3 years into a clear and usable timeline. Nathan appeared at 6:10. He looked at the legal pad, then at her. "You've been up a while," he said. "I made notes. The photographs, I need to address those first, before anything else. If they circulate, it doesn't matter what else happens. The narrative is already set." Nathan poured coffee and sat across from her. "I had someone look into it last night." She paused. "Already. I made one call after you went to sleep." He set his cup down. "The man in the photographs is named Marcus Lowe. He is a minor figure in the Denver entertainment business. He was paid to appear in those images. We have, as of this morning, an affidavit from someone who witnessed the arrangement being made." Emily stared at him. "One call," she said. "I've had the same assistant for 22 years, Nathan said. "He doesn't sleep much." She exhaled. "The affidavit," she said. "Who was the witness?" "Someone who works for the photographer Claudia hired. Apparently the amount they were offered for the job was significantly lower than promised, and the person in question decided that loyalty to a client who underpays is a limited virtue." Nathan allowed himself a small, dry expression. Money moves in interesting directions when it feels disrespected. Emily picked up her pen. "What else?" The investors who attended the dinner last night, 3 of them reached out to my office this morning, independently, within the same 2-hour window. He paused. They are uncomfortable. About the divorce. About the photographs. About the manner of the evening in general. These are men who do business based on trust and measured judgment. Watching Claudia Harrington orchestrate a public ambush at a Christmas dinner and produce fabricated evidence against a family member has given them concerns about the quality of judgment at the top of Harrington Realty. Emily looked at her legal pad. They're pulling out, she said. Not yet, but they're asking questions. And when men like that start asking questions, the answers tend to have consequences. She was quiet for a moment, thinking. I don't want them to lose everything, she said. The company employs a lot of people who had nothing to do with what happened at that table. Nathan studied her. You're thinking about the employees. I'm thinking about the fact that when a company collapses, it's never the people at the top who suffer most. She tapped her pen against the pad. If Whitmore Global is positioned the way you described, if we have real leverage over the financing structure, then we don't need to destroy Harrington Realty. We need to restructure it. The silence stretched between them. You're thinking about this very carefully, Nathan said. I've been thinking about it since 4 a.m. She met his eyes. I want what's fair, Dad. I want the record set straight. I want those photographs documented as fraud. I want a divorce settlement that reflects 3 years of my actual contribution to that family, not a number designed to make me go away quietly. She held his gaze. And I want to make sure that what comes next doesn't punish the people who deserve it least. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. When did you grow up? He said. Sometime between the hospital waiting rooms and the Christmas decorations, she said. He almost smiled. I'll make the calls, he said. But Emily, there's something you need to know before we go any further. Something I need to tell you about the Harrington finances that I didn't mention last night. She put down her pen. Tell me, she said. He leaned forward. Harrington Realty has been in serious financial trouble for 14 months, he said. Not moderate trouble, the kind of trouble that ends companies. Daniel's expansion into the Mountain West markets was badly overleveraged. The returns haven't materialized, and the family has been managing a shortfall that is at this point significant enough to be existential. Emily's hands went very still on the table. He was going to lose the company, she said slowly. Possibly. And the Langley connection. Senator Langley has liquidity and political relationships that could stabilize Daniel's position with certain city and state contracts that Harrington Realty has been losing bids on. Nathan paused. Victoria Langley is not just a social upgrade. She is a financial lifeline. The whole thing rearranged itself in Emily's mind. The dinner, the timeline, the urgency of it, the fact that it happened at Christmas with business partners present rather than in a lawyer's office with time for her to prepare. They needed it to be fast, she said. They needed it to be done before the new year. There are financial disclosures required in January that will become significantly more complicated if Daniel is in the middle of a contested divorce. And if I had signed those papers last night, you would have been gone before anyone looked closely enough to ask questions. Emily sat back in her chair. The necklace she had left on the table, the settlement offer, the fabricated photographs designed to prevent her from being a sympathetic figure in court. None of it was about disliking her. All of it was about the calendar, the January disclosures, the financial hole that needed to be filled before someone started looking. She had been a complication in someone else's rescue plan. Dad, she said. Yes. How long do we have before the January window? Nathan looked at her with the expression of a man who has just watched something he built in someone else finally activate. 16 days, he said. Emily picked up her pen. Then we have work to do, she said. And somewhere across the city, in a mountain estate, where the Christmas decorations were still up and the wine glasses from the night before had not yet been cleared. Claudia Harrington's phone rang for the first time that morning. She answered it immediately, because Claudia always answered immediately. The voice on the other end was one of the investors from last night's dinner. His tone was not what she expected. She sat up straighter in her chair. What do you mean the photograph arrangement has been documented? She said. Her voice was still controlled, but the temperature of it had changed. That isn't possible. Who told you that? She listened. Her hand tightened around the phone. I see, she said. Those 2 words in that particular tone from a woman who never admitted uncertainty. She set the phone down and sat very still. For the first time since she had begun planning the Christmas dinner 4 months ago, Claudia Harrington felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt like she might have made a mistake. Claudia Harrington did not panic. She had not panicked in 40 years of managing people, managing money, and managing the particular kind of quiet crisis that wealthy families specialize in producing and then burying before anyone outside the household notices. She had survived a husband who gambled badly in the 90s, a son who nearly destroyed a business deal at 26 by trusting the wrong partner, and 3 separate occasions when family secrets had come within arm's reach of becoming public. She had managed all of it with the same instrument she managed everything: control. Precise, comprehensive, relentless control. She set down the phone. She stood. She walked to the window. The snow was still falling outside, gentler now than the night before, the kind of snow that looks peaceful unless you know what's underneath it. She stood there for exactly 45 seconds, she counted without meaning to, the way disciplined people count when they are giving themselves permission to feel something before shutting it back down. Then she turned and called her lawyer. Richard Marsh had represented the Harrington family for 19 years. He answered on the second ring, which at 7:15 in the morning on the day after Christmas said something about either his dedication or his awareness that Claudia Harrington's calls were never truly optional. "The photographs," she said without greeting him. "Someone has documented the arrangement. One of the investors called me this morning. He used the word documented. I need to know exactly how much exposure we have, and I need to know in the next 2 hours." A pause on the line, longer than she liked. "Claudia," Richard said carefully, "when you say the arrangement, the photographs that were presented last night at the dinner, someone who was involved in producing them has apparently provided information to a third party. I need to know who, how, and what they've said." Another pause. "I advised against the photographs," he said, quietly, the way a man speaks when he is reminding someone of something without wanting to be accused of saying, "I told you so." "I remember your advice, Richard. I'm not asking you to repeat it. I'm asking you what we do now. If there's documented evidence that the images were fabricated and that fabrication can be tied directly to you or to anyone acting on your instructions, then we are looking at potential fraud exposure in the context of divorce proceedings. That is not a small thing." "How not small?" "Claudia." His voice shifted, firmer, the voice of a man who has decided that being careful has now become more dangerous than being direct. "If this goes where I think it might go, you need to stop. No more calls, no more arrangements, nothing that creates additional paper. Whatever you were planning for the next week, pause it, all of it. Do you understand me?" She was quiet. "Claudia." "I understand you," she said. Her voice was perfectly steady. "Find out what they have." She hung up. She stood in the middle of the room and she thought about Emily. Emily, who had walked out of that dinner without crying, who had pushed the divorce papers back across the table, who had stood up and said in front of 28 witnesses that the photographs were fabricated clearly and specifically and without a single tremor in her voice. She had dismissed that composure last night as stubbornness, as the performance of a woman who was saving her breakdown for a more private moment. Now, standing in the cold morning quiet, Claudia was revising that assessment, because a woman without options does not walk out of a settlement negotiation into a Colorado snowstorm in the middle of the night and have an affidavit documenting photograph fraud ready by 7 the following morning. That was not a woman without options. That was a woman who had been waiting for the right moment to show you what she had. Claudia picked up the phone again. This time she called Daniel. He answered on the first ring. He had not slept. She could hear it. "We have a problem," she said. Down the hall, she heard him stand up from wherever he had been sitting. Across the city in Whitmore Tower, the morning moved fast. By 7:45, Nathan had made 4 calls. Emily sat across from him at the table and listened to half of each conversation, his side measured and precise, the language of someone who has operated at the highest level of business for long enough that pressure registers not as urgency, but as information to be processed and directed. The first call was to Whitmore Global's lead attorney. Brief, specific. By the end of it, 3 things were in motion: a formal response to the divorce filing a request for full financial disclosure from Harrington Realty as required in contested proceedings, and a preliminary communication to the court regarding the fabricated photographs as potential evidence tampering. Emily listened to the words evidence tampering and felt something settle in her chest. Not satisfaction exactly. Something more like the relief of a fact being named correctly after a long time of being described in softer language. The second call was to a man whose name Emily didn't recognize. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, Nathan told her that Whitmore Global's positioning in the Harrington financing structure was now being formally reviewed, and that the review would be visible to Harrington Realty's primary lenders within 24 hours. "What does that mean in plain language?" Emily asked. "It means that by tomorrow morning, the people who hold Daniel's debt will know that a significant player in his financial ecosystem is conducting a review. And when significant players conduct reviews, lenders get nervous. And when lenders get nervous, they start asking questions." "They start asking questions," Nathan confirmed. The third call. Emily recognized immediately from the voice on the other end, James Whitmore, her uncle, her father's younger brother, who ran the family's legal trust operations, and who, had she now remembered, always had strong opinions about Daniel Harrington that he had kept largely to himself out of respect for her choices. She heard her uncle say on the other end of the line, "She's there, put her on." Nathan held out the phone. Emily took it. "Emily," her uncle said. His voice was warm and fierce in equal measure. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Uncle James." "Are you actually fine? Or are you telling me you're fine, the way you told us for 3 years that everything was wonderful?" She almost smiled. "I'm actually fine. I'm angry and I'm tired and I know exactly what I want to happen next. That's a kind of fine." "That's the best kind," he said. "Listen to your father. And Emily, you should know that your cousin Patricia has been building a file on the Harrington financial situation for the past 8 months. Not on our instruction. On her own initiative because she was worried about you." Emily paused. "Patricia has been—" Father across the table. He was watching her with the expression of a man who knows more than he has said and is waiting for the right moment. "How long have you known about Patricia's file?" she asked him after she handed back the phone. 6 months, he said simply. "You let her do it." "I didn't stop her." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "You've all been waiting," she said. "We've been ready," he said. "There's a difference. Waiting implies we expected you to fail. Ready implies we trusted you to know when you needed support." She looked down at her legal pad, all the notes she had made since 5 in the morning, the timeline, the figures, the names. She thought about 3 years of Christmas dinners where she had cooked and organized and absorbed and said nothing. 3 years of believing that independence meant doing it entirely alone. 3 years during which apparently the people who loved her had been quietly building a safety net she didn't know was there. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a moment, then she straightened. "What's in Patricia's file?" she said. Nathan placed a tablet on the table and turned it to face her. She read. She read for 20 minutes without speaking, and with every page, the picture sharpened. Harrington Realty's financials in detail, the over-leveraged Mountain West expansion, the shortfall, the timeline of deterioration. More than that, correspondence. Internal correspondence that Patricia had obtained through channels. Emily did not immediately understand from sources inside the Harrington organization who had apparently been willing to share information about a company they believed was being mismanaged toward a collapse that would cost them their jobs. And buried in the middle of it, a document that made Emily stop completely. She read it twice. Then she looked up. "Dad," she said, "this is a letter of intent." "Yes." "Between Daniel Harrington and Senator Langley's investment office." She looked back at the document. "Dated 9 months ago." "Yes." "The plan to divorce me and align with Victoria has been in writing for 9 months." "Yes," Nathan said. The word landed in the room like something physical. 9 months. While she had been cooking for family events and managing Daniel's schedule and sitting in waiting rooms and holding that marriage together with both hands, the papers ending it had already been drafted and signed by her husband and his new future father-in-law in an office somewhere. She set the tablet down. She was quiet for a moment. "He looked at the tablecloth," she said, more to herself than to her father. The thing that had stayed with her, Daniel's eyes on the tablecloth rather than on her face. She had read it last night as cowardice. Now she understood it was something else. It was the specific avoidance of a man who has been living a lie for 9 months and has simply run out of the energy required to maintain eye contact through the end of it. "Emily," Nathan said gently, "I'm all right." She picked up her pen. "I'm all right. I just needed a second. She took the second. Then she said, "The letter of intent. Is it signed by Daniel personally?" "It is." "Then we have documentation that he entered into a formal arrangement with another party while still married to me 9 months before serving me divorce papers." She wrote something on the pad. "That changes the settlement conversation significantly." "It does," Nathan said. "Our attorneys are already aware." At 9:15, Nathan's assistant, a compact, precise man named Gerald, who had Emily now understood been making calls since before 6 in the morning, came in and placed a printed summary on the table. Emily picked it up. 3 of the investors from last night's dinner had formally requested a meeting with Harrington Realty's leadership regarding their continued participation in the company's financing. The meeting request was worded in the specific, careful language of people who are about to withdraw but want it to appear that they are still deliberating. Gerald said, "There's also a call request from a Ms. Victoria Langley." Emily looked up. "For whom?" "For you, Ms. Whitmore." The room went quiet. Nathan looked at Emily. Emily looked at the name on the summary sheet. "When did the request come in?" she asked. 40 minutes ago." She thought about this. Victoria Langley had been seated at the far end of that Christmas table with the composed warmth of a woman who believed the evening's outcome was already secured. She had looked at Emily with something that was almost sympathy, which is what people do when they believe the person across from them has no remaining options, and they want to be remembered as having been gracious about it. She was calling now. 40 minutes after the investor meeting request landed. That was not a coincidence. "Tell her I'll call her back," Emily said. Gerald nodded and left. Nathan said nothing. He had learned across the morning to let Emily set the pace. She stood, walked to the window and stood there, not looking at anything in particular, just giving herself 30 seconds to think without anyone watching her think. Victoria Langley was not the villain in this story. Emily had understood that from the moment she saw her stand up at the table. Victoria was a woman who had been offered something she wanted and had not asked too many questions about the cost to other people. That was a moral failure, not a malicious one. And now Victoria was calling because someone, probably her father, had seen the morning's developments and determined that the Harrington Alliance was beginning to look like a liability. She was calling to assess. She might, Emily thought, also be calling because she felt worse about last night than she had expected to. Emily returned to the table. "I'll call her back this afternoon," she said, "after the attorney meeting." The attorney meeting happened at 11. 3 of Nathan's people and Emily around a conference table on the 38th floor, with the city spread out below them through glass that Emily had grown up pressing her hands against as a child, fascinated by the height. She presented her notes, the timeline she had built since 5 that morning, the 3 years of her contributions to the Harrington family structure. The events managed the commitments, honored the support provided during Daniel's business difficulties in a form that had never been formally compensated or acknowledged. The lead attorney, a woman named Carol Stanton, who had the specific kind of calm that comes from 25 years of watching rich people behave badly and understanding exactly what it meant in legal terms, listened without interrupting. When Emily finished, Carol looked at her notes. "The letter of intent from 9 months ago," Carol said. "Combined with the fabricated photograph documentation, combined with the financial disclosure requirements that will be triggered by a contested filing." She looked up. "Mrs. Harrington." "Whitmore," Emily said. Carol paused, a small smile. "Ms. Whitmore, the settlement offer they made you last night was not just insulting. It was structurally designed to prevent you from accessing any of the financial information that would be available to you in a contested proceeding. They needed you to sign before January, because what comes out in January changes everything." "I know," Emily said. Carol studied her. "How much do you know about the January disclosures?" "I know they have a significant shortfall. I know the Mountain West expansion was over-leveraged. I know that without new capital the kind Senator Langley's office was positioned to provide through a family alliance, Harrington Realty is in serious trouble." She paused. "I know that trouble has a timeline, and that timeline made me inconvenient." Carol set down her pen. "Ms. Whitmore," she said, "I've been practicing for 25 years. I want you to understand something clearly." She looked at Emily directly. "You did not walk out of that dinner last night. You walked into a very strong legal position." Something moved through Emily that she had not expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Something quieter. The particular feeling of being seen accurately after a long time of being misread. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. The next 2 weeks are going to be difficult. The Harrington attorneys will move fast because they have to. They will try to settle again, and the offer will be better, but still not what you're owed. They will attempt to reframe the narrative around the photographs. They may try to move assets before the disclosure window. Carol folded her hands on the table. We need to be faster than they are. What do you need from me? Everything you remember from 3 years. Every event you organized, every commitment you managed, every instance where your contributions directly supported Daniel's business and personal functioning. Dates if you have them. Names where relevant. It doesn't need to be perfect. We fill in the gaps with discovery. She paused. And I need you to understand that this process done correctly will result in full transparency about the Harrington financial situation. That will be uncomfortable for a lot of people connected to that family. I understand, Emily said. Some of them will be people you spent 3 years sitting at tables with. I understand. Carol looked at her for a moment. You're not conflicted about this. Emily thought about the tablecloth, the fabricated photographs, the 9-month letter of intent, the wrist that still ached under her sleeve. I'm many things, she said. I'm not conflicted. The meeting ended at 12:30. Emily ate lunch at the small table in her father's kitchen, standing up because she was not ready to sit still. She ate without tasting it and thought about the afternoon. At 1:15, she called Victoria Langley back. The phone rang 3 times. Then Victoria answered, and her voice had the careful quality of a person who has been rehearsing. Emily, she said, thank you for calling me back. I wasn't sure you would. I said I would, Emily said. I don't say things I don't mean. A brief pause. No, I don't think you do. Another pause, longer. I want to say something and I want you to hear it as genuine, not as strategy, because I understand that from where you're standing, everything I say probably sounds like strategy. Say it. Last night was wrong. Victoria's voice shifted, dropped the careful quality, became something more unguarded. The photographs were wrong. The timing was wrong. The way it was set up, I knew it was going to be hard, but I didn't know it was going to be that. I didn't know about the photographs until they appeared on the table. I want you to know that. Emily listened to this. And now, she said, and now my father's office has had a difficult morning, and there are questions being asked about the nature of the agreement between our families and... Victoria stopped herself, started again. Emily, I'm calling you because I respect what I saw last night. I'm not calling you to protect the arrangement. I'm calling you because I think you deserve a direct conversation from me and not through lawyers. What do you want, Victoria? A beat. I want to know if there's a way through this that doesn't require everything to burn down, Victoria said. I want to know what you actually need, not what the lawyers will eventually agree to, what you actually need. Emily was quiet for a moment. This was not what she had expected. She had expected calculation. She had expected Victoria to be calling on behalf of her father's office, feeling out vulnerabilities, assessing exposure. She had expected underneath the warmth the same fundamental quality she saw in Claudia, the quality of someone whose concern for other people is genuine only when it aligns with their own interests. What she was hearing instead was something she couldn't immediately categorize. Why did you agree to it? Emily asked, knowing he was married. The silence on the other end was long enough to be real rather than performed. Because I've known Daniel since we were 22, Victoria said. Because I told myself the marriage had already broken down and I wasn't causing the breakdown. Because my father thought it was a good alignment and I trusted his judgment more than my own. A pause. And because I wanted something I should have examined more carefully before I reached for it. Another pause. None of that excuses it. I'm not trying to excuse it. I'm trying to be honest with you because you've been the only person in this entire situation who has been consistently honest. Emily pressed her pen against her legal pad. I'll tell you what I need, she said. I need what's fair. I need the record to reflect what actually happened in that marriage and why it's ending. I need those photographs formally discredited and off the table entirely. And I need a settlement that reflects 3 years of my actual contribution, not a number designed to make me disappear. And the company, Victoria said carefully. The people who work there. Emily paused. I'm not trying to destroy the company, she said. I'm aware of what the January disclosures will show. I'm aware that without new capital, there are people who will lose jobs they depend on. She looked at her legal pad. I have an idea about that, but it requires conversations I haven't had yet. What kind of idea? The kind that requires everyone involved to be honest about what the situation actually is, Emily said, including your father's office. Another silence. Can I ask you something? Victoria said. Go ahead. Who are you, I mean? She seemed to catch herself. I knew Daniel for years. He never talked about your family in any detail, just that you'd grown up apart from them, that there had been some distance. But you walked out of that dinner last night with a composure that I haven't seen in people who have been doing this their entire lives, and by this morning it was clear that you have— She stopped. Who are you, Emily? Emily looked out the window at the city. She thought about who she was. She was a woman who had cooked Christmas dinners for a family that despised her, who had organized charity events and managed hospital visits and sat quietly at tables where she was routinely talked over, who had carried a phone for 3 years without using it because she believed that independence meant proving you needed no one. She was also the only daughter of Nathan Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Global Holdings, a company whose reach touched nearly every major financial sector in the American West. She was a woman who had walked away from that, deliberately lived without it for 3 years, and come back to it only when the alternative was accepting a lie as the final word on who she was. She was both of those things, and they were not in conflict. I'm someone who knows what she's worth, Emily said. It took me 3 years to stop letting other people define that number, but I know it now. Victoria said nothing for a moment, then quietly, I believe you. The call ended at 2 o'clock. Emily set down the phone and looked at her notes and thought about what came next. What came next arrived faster than she expected. At 2:47, Nathan appeared in the doorway with his phone in his hand and an expression Emily had not seen on him before. Not alarm exactly. The expression of a man who has been expecting a particular piece of news and finds now that it has arrived that expecting it was not the same as being fully prepared for it. Daniel is here, he said. Emily looked up. Here, she repeated. In the building. In the lobby. He came alone. No lawyers. No mother. Nathan's voice was careful. He's asking to see you. The room was very quiet. Emily turned her pen slowly between her fingers. Daniel had found out where she was, which meant Daniel had figured out something about her that he had apparently failed to investigate in 3 years of marriage. The thought landed with a particular weight. He knows, she said. It wasn't a question. He knows enough, Nathan said. The building's name is on the sign. She sat with this for a moment. What do you want to do? Nathan asked. She stood. I want to see him, she said. Alone. Emily. He came without lawyers. I'll see him without lawyers. She looked at her father. It's going to be fine, Dad. I know what I'm doing. Nathan studied her for a long moment. Then he stepped back. I'll be on the 38th floor, he said. Gerald will bring him up. Daniel Harrington arrived in the residence elevator 4 minutes later. He stepped out and stopped when he saw Emily standing in the middle of the room, and whatever he had prepared himself to find, whatever version of her he had been rehearsing responses to in the lobby, it clearly was not this. She was not in distress. She was not in tears. She was not the version of herself that 3 years in his family had sometimes produced the careful, contained woman who managed her own reactions to protect other people's comfort. She was standing in her father's living room in the 42nd floor residence of Whitmore Global Holdings, with a legal pad in her hand and a pen behind her ear, and the particular quality in her face of someone who has been working very hard all morning on something important. He looked around the room, at the city through the glass, at the small things that said whose residence this was, the family photographs, the framed documents, the very specific kind of understated comfort that comes from generational wealth. He looked back at Emily. How long, he said. His voice was not accusatory. It was the voice of someone asking a question they needed the answer to more than they needed to be right about anything. How long have you known that this was here, that your father? Always, she said simply. He closed his eyes briefly. You walked away from this, he said, deliberately. I walked away from it to find out if someone could love me without it, she said. You know that. I told you that when we met. I told you I had complicated family things I was working through and that I needed space from a life that wasn't fully mine yet. I thought that meant— He stopped. I know what you thought it meant, she said. I think I let you believe a version of it that was more manageable. She paused. That was my mistake. I should have trusted you with the full truth earlier. I didn't because I was afraid of what it would change. And I was right to be afraid as it turned out, though, not in the way I expected. He stood in the doorway and looked at her, and she could see him processing the same way she had spent the morning, processing the way information rearranges your understanding of a story you thought you knew completely. "Who else knows?" he said. "The investors are figuring it out. Your lawyers will know formally within the hour." She looked at him steadily. "Your mother knows something went wrong this morning. She doesn't know the full scope yet. I expect she will by tonight." He sat down in the chair closest to the door without being invited, the way people sit when their legs have decided before their mind has. "Emily," he said, "the letter of intent, the one from 9 months ago." He looked at his hands. "I need you to understand that when I signed that the marriage was already, I told myself it was already over. I told myself what I had to tell myself." "I know," she said. "That doesn't make it—" "I know," she said again quietly. "I know it doesn't make it right. I'm not asking you to justify it, Daniel. I'm past the point where your reasons are what matters most to me." She set the legal pad down on the table beside her. "What matters now is what happens next. And what happens next depends on whether you're willing to be honest in a way that last night's performance didn't suggest you were capable of." He looked up at her. "What do you want?" he said. Not the way Claudia would say it, as a tactical question designed to identify and neutralize. The way a person asks it when they are genuinely uncertain and genuinely asking. "I want the truth to be on record," she said. "I want a settlement that's fair. I want the photographs documented as fraud with full legal acknowledgement from your family. And I want you to consider something that I've been thinking about all morning." "What?" She sat down across from him. "Your company is going to fail," she said. Not cruelly, as a fact. Not maybe, not eventually. In the next 6 months, without significant restructuring and new capital, Harrington Realty is going to collapse under the weight of the Mountain West shortfall. You know that. Your mother knows that. Senator Langley knows that, which is why his daughter was positioned as a solution. Daniel said nothing, but he did not look away. "Whitmore Global," Emily said, "has both the capital and the sector experience to restructure what you've built and make it viable. Not because I want to own your company, but because there are people who work for Harrington Realty who had nothing to do with what happened at that table, and they deserve to still have jobs in a year." She looked at him directly. "That's the idea I've been building all morning." The silence in the room was the kind that happens when something has shifted fundamentally, and both people know it. "You want to rescue the company," he said, slowly. "I want to restructure it," she corrected. "There's a difference. And I want to do it on terms that are honest and fair and don't require anyone to pretend last night didn't happen." She paused. "But that conversation doesn't happen until the divorce proceedings are settled correctly. And the divorce proceedings don't settle correctly until your mother stops treating this like a crisis management problem and starts treating it like the human situation it actually is." Daniel looked at her for a long time. She watched his face go through several things. Something that was not quite grief and not quite shame. Something in between that occupied the particular space where both live when a person finally stops lying to themselves. "She's not going to take this well," he said, about his mother. "No," Emily agreed. "She isn't. She'll fight. She has limited ground left to fight on." Emily said it without satisfaction. "She knows that. That call she got this morning, she knows." He pressed his hands against his knees. "Emily," he said, "I'm sorry." She listened to that. She had been expecting it, had thought about in the abstract what she would feel when he said it, whether it would matter, whether the 3 years of accumulated weight would lift or stay exactly where it was. "I know you are," she said. "I believe you mean it right now. But it's not enough." "It's not nothing," she said. "But no, it's not enough." She looked at him. "What would be enough is doing the right thing from here. That's what I need from you, not the apology, the decision that comes after it." He nodded, once. The slow, heavy nod of a man who understands that he has arrived at a moment he cannot manage his way out of, and cannot charm his way through, and cannot let his mother handle on his behalf. A man who has run out of easier options and is finally at cost facing the one that was always there. "Okay," he said. "Okay what?" "Okay, I'll talk to my lawyers. Today, without my mother in the room." He met her eyes. "And I'll tell them the photographs were fabricated. Formally. On record." Something shifted very slightly in Emily's chest. She picked up her legal pad. "I'll have Carol Stanton's office send over a proposed framework for the settlement conversation," she said. You should have your own lawyers review it independently, not through your mother's counsel. You need separate representation for this." He looked at her. "You're telling me how to protect myself." "I'm telling you how to do this honestly," she said. "There's a difference." He stood, moved toward the elevator. Then he stopped. "Emily," he said without turning around. "That night at the hospital, when I was—" He stopped himself. "You stayed. You didn't have to. You could have called someone and gone home, but you stayed the whole night." She remembered the night, a health scare 18 months ago. Nothing ultimately serious, but frightening enough in the hours before they knew that. She had sat in a waiting room chair until 4 in the morning alone because Daniel had asked her not to call his mother yet. "I stayed because I was your wife," she said. "I know." His voice was quiet. "I know that's why." A pause. "I just wanted to say I remember it." He stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Emily sat alone in her father's living room for a moment, just one moment. Then she picked up her pen and turned to a fresh page on the legal pad, and she started writing. 16 days until the January window, 15 now. There was a great deal left to do. Daniel's call to his own lawyers lasted 40 minutes. Emily knew this because Gerald tracked it, not by listening, not by anything invasive, simply because Gerald had been running information flow for Nathan Whitmore for 22 years, and tracking things was what Gerald did the way other people breathed. He appeared in the doorway at 3:45 and told her quietly that Daniel Harrington had retained independent counsel at 3 o'clock and that his first call to that counsel had concluded 11 minutes ago. Emily nodded, wrote the time on her legal pad. She had moved from the living room to the smaller office off the main corridor, a room with a desk and a phone and a window, and nothing decorative, which suited her exactly right now, because decorative things required a kind of attention she did not have spare. She had been working since the attorney meeting ended, building the framework she had described to Daniel, translating the idea she had been carrying since 4 in the morning into something concrete enough that Carol Stanton's office could begin drafting language around it. The idea was not complicated in its essence. Whitmore Global would provide restructuring capital to Harrington Realty under a formal agreement that included new leadership terms, a transparent accounting of the Mountain West shortfall, and a governance structure that removed the people whose judgment had produced the current crisis. The company would survive. The employees would keep their jobs. The Harrington name would remain on the building, which was the thing Daniel actually cared about most. She had always known that the name was the thing, the continuity of it, the sense that what his grandfather had built had not been lost on his watch. What would not survive was the fiction that Claudia Harrington had been running the family for the past decade, making decisions, controlling alliances, treating human beings as resources to be positioned or removed according to the family's strategic needs. That part was over. Emily was putting the last of her notes into a coherent sequence when her phone buzzed on the desk beside her. Not the old phone, her regular one. The name on the screen was one she had not expected. Claudia Harrington. She looked at it for 2 full rings. Then she answered. "Claudia," she said, the same even tone she had used at the Christmas table, the one that had so clearly unsettled the woman on the other end. There was a brief pause. "Emily." Claudia's voice had changed. Not dramatically, she was too controlled for dramatic change, but the smoothness was different, thinner, the way ice changes texture before it breaks, still holding its shape but no longer reliable. "I'd like to meet with you." "When?" "This evening, if that's possible." Emily looked at her legal pad. "Why?" "Because I think we have things to discuss that are better discussed directly." A pause. "Without lawyers present." "Claudia, everything we discuss from this point forward will be with lawyers present." A short silence. "I understand," Claudia said. Her voice had flattened slightly at that not defeat. Claudia Harrington did not do defeat but acknowledgement. The sound of a woman recalibrating. "Then with lawyers present, tomorrow morning, I'd like to propose a meeting." "I'll have Carol Stanton's office contact your counsel," Emily said. "They can arrange the logistics." "Carol Stanton." A pause, and in the pause Emily could hear the name landing. Carol Stanton was not a name you heard without knowing what it meant. 25 years of high-stakes family law, a win record that was more accurately described as a philosophy she did not lose because she did not take cases she did not believe in. "You've retained Carol Stanton." "I have." The silence this time was longer. "Emily," Claudia said, and something in her voice had changed, again shifted into a register Emily had never heard from her before. Not warmth, it was not warmth, but something that was at least honest. "I want to say something to you." "Say it." "I underestimated you." The words came out without decoration, stated like a fact. "I have underestimated you from the first moment Daniel brought you home, and I'd like you to know I understand that now." Emily held the phone and thought about 3 years of Christmas dinners and charity events and cold treatment designed to communicate without ever saying it directly that she did not belong. She thought about the photographs on the table, the envelope, the hand around her wrist. "That's a starting point," Emily said. "It's not an ending point." "I know," Claudia said. "I'm not calling to apologize and have it be over. I'm calling because I want you to know that when we sit down tomorrow, I am prepared to have a real conversation, not a performance, not a strategy." A breath. "A real conversation." Emily kept her voice level. "I'll be there." She ended the call. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. Claudia Harrington had called her directly. Without lawyers, without Daniel as intermediary, without the armor of formal proceedings. That was not a small thing. For a woman of Claudia's particular construction, the absolute need to control every surface of every interaction, making that call must have cost something significant. Emily was not moved by it, but she noted it. She was still sitting with it when Nathan knocked on the office doorframe. "Patricia's here," he said. Patricia Whitmore was 31, 2 years younger than Emily, and had the energy of someone who slept 5 hours a night, not from necessity, but from preference, because there was too much interesting work to justify more. She came through this doorway already talking. "I know you probably have a lot of feelings about the file, and I want to say up front that I kept it because I was scared for you, not because I was waiting to use it against anyone, and I should have told you it existed, but you'd been very clear about needing space, and I didn't want to be the thing that—" She stopped herself, looked at Emily. "You look exhausted." "I'm fine," Emily said. "You've been awake since 5, and you've done more in one day than most people do in a month." Patricia sat down across from her without being asked the way family does. "I'm glad you're home." Emily looked at her cousin. This person she had grown up alongside, whose presence in her childhood was one of the things she had quietly missed most during the 3 years of distance. Patricia, who had spent 8 months building a file she never intended to use unless it was needed and had never said a word. "Thank you," Emily said. "For the file. It was the least I could do." It was actually quite a lot. Patricia made a dismissive gesture. "The important thing is what's in it, because there's something in it that I didn't put in the summary I sent last night, something I found 2 weeks ago that I've been sitting with and not knowing how to—" She paused. "I need to show you something." She pulled out a tablet and set it on the desk between them. Emily leaned forward. The document on the screen was a financial transfer record. Corporate accounts, the kind of document that was technically accessible through certain regulatory filings, but required knowing exactly what you were looking for to find. Emily read it. Then she read it again. "This is from 14 months ago," she said. "Yes. This is a transfer from the Harrington Family Trust." She looked at the numbers. "To a personal account." "To Claudia Harrington's personal account," Patricia said. "Not the family operating account, not the company, her personal account, 14 months ago, which is exactly when the Mountain West expansion started showing its first serious losses." Emily's mind was already moving. "She was pulling money out," Emily said slowly, "while the company was going under. She was moving assets into a personal account so that when the collapse came, the family trust would show reduced assets available to creditors. And to divorce settlements." Patricia held her gaze. "Emily, she wasn't just planning to divorce you. She was planning the financial architecture around the divorce for over a year. She moved enough out of the accessible structure that if you had signed those papers on Christmas night, the settlement they offered you would have been calculated against a deliberately impoverished version of the family finances." The room was very still. Emily sat back. She thought about Claudia's voice on the phone 20 minutes ago, the acknowledgement that she had underestimated Emily, the offer of a real conversation. The timing of that offer, now that she understood this, had a different quality. Claudia was not calling because she had found her conscience. Claudia was calling because she did not yet know whether Emily had found this. "Does Richard Marsh know about this?" Emily asked, Claudia's lawyer. "If he's any good, he suspects it. He'd never have touched it directly." Patricia set the tablet down. Emily, this is financial fraud in the context of divorce proceedings. This is not a negotiating chip. This is a crime. Emily looked at the numbers on the screen. She thought about what she had told Carol Stanton that morning, what she had told her father, what she had told Daniel himself when he sat across from her, and she laid out what she needed. I want what's fair. She thought about fair. Fair was a complicated calculation when the person on the other side had been quietly restructuring the definition of it for 14 months. I need Carol on the phone, Emily said. Patricia was already dialing. Carol Stanton listened to the summary of the transfer document without interrupting. When Patricia finished, there was a short silence on the line. Send it to my office immediately, Carol said. Her voice had a particular quality, not excitement, nothing as unprofessional as excitement. The focused sharpness of someone whose understanding of a situation has just reconfigured around a new center of gravity. Emily, I need you to understand what this changes. Tell me. This changes everything. This is no longer a contested divorce proceeding with a fraudulent photograph complication. This is a fraud case that has a divorce proceeding attached to it. The leverage shifts entirely. A pause. Claudia Harrington needs to understand that before tomorrow's meeting. Her lawyers need to understand it tonight. Because if they walk into that meeting tomorrow without knowing what we have, the conversation will be very different from the one she called you expecting to have. Should I tell her? Emily asked. A brief pause. Not directly, Carol said, but we'll make sure her counsel is informed through the appropriate channels before 9 tomorrow morning. Another pause. Emily, how do you want to handle this? Emily pressed the pen against the pad. The same way I've handled everything today, she said, honestly and completely. The call ended. Patricia looked at her cousin across the desk. Are you okay? She said. Emily thought about the question. In the past, 18 hours she had been publicly humiliated at a Christmas dinner, had her wrist grabbed hard enough to bruise, had been presented with fabricated photographs in front of a room full of witnesses, had walked out into a snowstorm and called her father. For the first time in 3 years, had slept 4 hours, had built a legal and financial strategy from scratch, starting at 5 in the morning, had spoken to her estranged husband in her father's living room, had received a call from Claudia Harrington, and had just discovered that the woman who had spent 3 years treating her as an obstacle had been quietly committing financial fraud against her for 14 months. I'm focused, she said. That's what I am right now. Focused. Patricia nodded. She understood the distinction. By 7 that evening, Claudia's lawyers had been informed. Emily knew this because Carol called at 7:12 to say that Richard Marsh's office had requested an emergency postponement of the following morning's meeting to allow adequate time to prepare, which was Richard Marsh's very polished way of saying that Richard Marsh had just learned something that required him to have a difficult conversation with his client before any further meetings occurred. Carol had declined the postponement. The meeting would proceed at 9. Emily ate dinner with her father and Patricia at the long table in the residence, a quiet meal that felt almost surreal after the day it followed. Nathan made the food himself he had always cooked when he was managing difficult feelings. It was his version of the legal pad and the pen, the physical occupation that kept the mind clear. He made pasta from scratch, simple and good, and they ate without talking about the case for an entire 20 minutes, which was the longest break Emily had taken all day. Tell me something that has nothing to do with any of this, Emily said. Nathan looked at her. Then he told her about a trip he had taken last spring to visit a small vineyard in New Mexico, run by a couple who had given up careers in technology to grow grapes, and how the wine was imperfect and interesting, and how the couple had a dog named Senator who slept across the front step and refused to move for anyone. Emily laughed. It surprised her the way the laugh came sudden and real, and from somewhere below the focused, efficient place she had been operating in all day. Her body remembering that it contained things other than strategy. I needed that, she said. I know, Nathan said. Patricia poured more water and did not say anything but reached across and squeezed Emily's hand once quickly, the way you do when words would be smaller than the gesture. Emily slept 6 hours that night. She was up at 5:30, which was becoming her rhythm now, the natural calibration of a person with a great deal to accomplish, and the particular internal alarm system of someone who knows it. She spent the hour before the meeting reviewing the framework document Carol had refined overnight. It was clean and fair and comprehensive. The settlement figure was specific and justified, supported by a detailed accounting of her contributions over 3 years. The events, the management, the support, the labor that had never been formalized, but was nonetheless real and documentable. The photograph fraud acknowledgement was formal and required signatures from both Claudia and Daniel. The financial transfer issue was handled through a separate but parallel track that Carol had already referred to the appropriate regulatory body. That last piece Emily had thought about longest. Referring the transfer documentation to regulators was the correct thing. It was the honest thing. It was also the thing that had the most serious consequences for Claudia personally. Emily had sat with that for a long time in the early morning quiet and asked herself the question she always asked herself when she was about to do something with real consequences for another person. Is this about what's right, or is this about what hurts them? The answer was that it was about what was right. The transfer was fraud. The fraud had been directed at her specifically. Allowing it to go unaddressed would mean allowing a crime to be quietly buried in the resolution of a divorce proceeding, which was exactly what Claudia had been counting on. Referring it was not revenge, it was accuracy. She arrived at Carol's office at 8:45. The conference room was large and very quiet, the kind of room that has hosted 1,000 difficult conversations and absorbed them all without changing. Carol was already there along with 2 members of her team. On the other side of the long table, Richard Marsh sat with 2 of his own people, all 3 of them with the specific contained quality of people who have spent the previous 12 hours in damage control. Claudia Harrington sat between her lawyers. Emily noticed this immediately different from the night before, not smaller. Claudia was not a woman who became small, but contained in a different way, held in rather than projecting outward, something tightly managed behind the eyes. Across from her, Daniel sat slightly apart from his mother, with his own independent counsel beside him as Emily had advised. He looked like a man who had also slept poorly and had spent his waking hours thinking about choices that could not be unmade. Emily sat across from Claudia. For a moment the room simply held the fact of the 2 women looking at each other. Then Carol said, "We'll begin." The first 40 minutes were formal, documents exchanged, positions stated, the legal architecture of the settlement framework presented by Carol's team and reviewed by Marsh's. Emily watched Claudia's face during the presentation of the settlement figure and saw nothing. She hadn't expected a flicker of calculation, a glance at Marsh, a brief stillness as the number registered. The number was significantly higher than the Christmas Eve offer. It was still fair. Emily had been clear about that with Carol. Not punitive, fair. There was a difference, and it mattered. When the photograph section of the framework was presented, Claudia's jaw tightened. The formal acknowledgement of fabrication, the signature requirement. Marsh leaned toward her and said something quiet, and Claudia sat very still for a moment and then nodded. She nodded. That small motion cost her something. Emily could see the cost of it. The particular experience of a woman who has controlled every room she has ever entered, being asked to formally acknowledge in writing that she had lied. It was not easy for her. Emily did not need it to be easy, but she did not need it to be unnecessarily painful either. Then came the section on financial transfers. Marsh had clearly prepared Claudia for this. The preparation was visible in the way Claudia's expression did not change when the document was set in front of her. Too still. The composure of someone who has rehearsed for a specific moment, rather than the natural composure of someone encountering information they expected. This matter, Marsh said carefully, is being addressed through a separate regulatory process. My client is prepared to cooperate fully with that process, Carol said without any particular inflection. We're glad to hear that. Emily watched Claudia. Claudia was not looking at the document. She was looking at Emily. It was a different look than any she had directed at Emily in 3 years. Not contempt, not the managed courtesy of someone tolerating an unwanted presence, not even the thin acknowledgement from the phone call the evening before. Something more honest than all of those. The look of a woman who is seeing another person clearly for the first time and understanding that the picture she had built in her mind over 3 years was wrong in ways that had consequences. The consequences were sitting in the room around her in the form of a legal framework and a regulatory referral, and a woman who had been underestimated so comprehensively that the underestimation had become the source of its own undoing. "I'd like to say something," Claudia said. Marsh put his hand on the table, but she looked at him with a glance that communicated clearly she was not asking permission. He moved his hand. "Emily," Claudia said. Emily met her eyes. "The photographs were my decision," Claudia said, "not Daniel's. He knew I intended to use something to protect our position, but the specific photographs that was mine. I want that on record." She paused. "He shouldn't carry that." The room was quiet. Emily looked at Daniel. He was looking at his mother with an expression that was difficult to read, something between surprise and a complicated gratitude, and the look of someone watching a person they love do the right thing too late, but still doing it. "That's on record," Carol said. She wrote something. "There are other things I should say," Claudia continued. Her voice was steady, but it was a different steadiness than her usual one. This one was effortful, chosen. "But I don't think a conference room is the right place for all of them." "No," Emily agreed. "It's not." Another silence. "Can I ask you something?" Claudia said. Emily waited. "The restructuring proposal." Claudia looked at her steadily. "The capital and governance framework you've put forward, you're genuinely proposing to save the company?" "Yes." "Why?" The question landed in the room and sat there. Emily thought about how to answer it in a way that was true without being more than the room could hold right now. "Because the right response to what happened to me is not to make sure everyone associated with it loses everything," she said. "There are 400 people employed by Harrington Realty. They had nothing to do with Christmas Eve. They don't deserve to lose their livelihoods because the people at the top of their company made decisions I wouldn't have made." She held Claudia's gaze. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm not doing it for Daniel. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, and I'm in a position to do it." Claudia looked at her for a long moment. "I spent 3 years," she said slowly, "telling myself you weren't what this family needed." She stopped. "I was wrong about that." It was not an apology exactly, not yet. It was something earlier than an apology, the admission that makes one possible. Emily recognized the difference. "I know," she said. The formal session resumed. By noon, the broad terms of the settlement had been agreed in principle. The specific figures required another 48 hours of documentation, but the framework was there, solid and fair, and everyone in the room understood that it would hold. As the meeting concluded and people began gathering their materials, Daniel appeared beside Emily, not blocking her, just present, waiting to see if she had anything to say before she left. "The hospital night," he said quietly. "I told you I remembered it." "I know." "There were other nights, too. Things you did that I didn't, that I should have." He stopped himself. "I'm not trying to relitigate anything. I just want you to know that I know what those 3 years actually looked like. I know what you actually did." He met her eyes. "Even if I didn't say it then." Emily looked at the man she had chosen, the man she had believed in, the man who had looked at a tablecloth instead of at her face when his family dismantled their marriage in front of an audience. She thought about the hospital waiting room at 4 a.m. She thought about the Christmas decorations and the charity events and the quiet absorbing of 3 years of contempt. She thought about what it had cost her carried in the body, in the way she had learned to make herself smaller to fit the space she was allowed. She thought about all of it, and she said the thing that was true. "I know you know," she said. "That's enough for now." He nodded, started to move away. Then she said, "Daniel." He turned. "The company restructuring is going to require new leadership at the top," she said. "People your mother chose for loyalty rather than competence, they'll need to be replaced. That's going to be a hard process. There are people in that organization who are genuinely good at what they do and have been held back by the structure around them." She looked at him. "You know who they are. If you're willing to be honest about the difference, the transition can go well for those people." I was quiet for a moment. "You're asking me to help identify who stays and who goes." "I'm asking you to be honest about the organization you've been running," she said, "which is something you should have been doing for the past 3 years anyway." A beat. "You know the people. You know their work. Use that knowledge for something real." Something moved through his expression. Not gratitude exactly. Something older and less comfortable than gratitude. The feeling of being asked to be better than you have been and realizing you are capable of it. "Okay," he said. He left. Emily gathered her things. Carol walked with her to the elevator. "You did well in there," Carol said, not effusively, as a professional assessment. "We did well," Emily said. Carol shook her head slightly. "I've been doing this for 25 years. I've sat across from a lot of tables. The moment you told Claudia Harrington that the right response to what happened to you was not to make everyone around it lose everything." She paused. "Half the people in that room changed their mind about something." Emily looked at her. "What did they change their mind about?" "About who you are," Carol said simply. "They walked in with the version of you that was described to them. They left with the actual version." The elevator arrived. "Those are very different things." Emily stepped inside. The doors closed. She pressed her back against the elevator wall and let herself be carried down through the 42 floors of her father's building, through the place where the floors changed and the air changed and the city outside the glass changed, from the height that made it all look small to the ground level where it became individual and specific and real again. She thought about what Carol had said. They walked in with the version of you that was described to them. She had spent 3 years in a family that had described her to itself in a particular way. Ordinary, insufficient, a placeholder keeping a better option from arriving. They had described her so thoroughly in those terms that they had stopped seeing what was actually there. They had described her into a corner and then been genuinely shocked when she turned out not to be in it, that she thought was the thing she wanted to carry forward from all of this. Not the framework, not the settlement, not even the restructuring plan, though she believed in it. The knowledge that she had never been what they described. She had always been something else. She had simply been waiting in the particular patient way of someone who knows their own value and is willing to let other people catch up for the moment when that became undeniable. The elevator opened into the lobby. Emily walked through it and out through the front doors into the afternoon light, cold and clear and direct in the way of winter days that don't apologize for their sharpness. She stopped on the sidewalk. She breathed. 1 breath, 2. Behind her, the building rose 42 floors into the Denver sky, carrying in its upper floors a man who had been waiting for his daughter's call for 3 years, carrying a cousin who had spent 8 months building a file out of love, carrying a team of people who had been working since before dawn to put the right framework around the right outcome. She thought about the Harrington estate and its Christmas decorations, and the sound of wine glasses hitting the table and Claudia's hand around her wrist. She thought about the divorce papers and the envelope, and Daniel looking at the tablecloth. She thought about standing in the snow at midnight, cold and alone, holding a phone she had carried for 3 years. And she thought about the single word she had spoken into that phone when her father's voice came through. Dad. 1 word, 1 call, and everything that had followed from it, all of this entire day and all the days ahead, all of it had been waiting. In that 1 word had been possible from the moment she stopped trying to manage alone what she had never been meant to manage alone. She started walking. There was still a great deal left to do. The January window was in 14 days. And Emily Whitmore, daughter of Nathan, once the woman the Harrington family thought they could throw away, was just getting started. The 14 days moved, the way difficult days always move faster than you expect and slower than you can bear, each one carrying more inside it than a day should reasonably be asked to hold. Emily worked. That was the simplest way to describe those 2 weeks. She worked the way she had always worked, the way the Harrington family had benefited from for 3 years without ever once acknowledging it completely, precisely, without complaint, and without asking for recognition. The difference was that now the work had her name on it. Now the work was visible. Now when she walked into a room and sat down at a table and opened her notes, the people across from her knew exactly who she was and why she was there. That was a new feeling. She was still getting used to it. The restructuring framework took shape through a series of meetings that began the day after the settlement conference and ran straight through to the new year. Carol's office handled the divorce track. Emily handled the business track. Nathan was present for the large picture conversations and made himself deliberately absent from the detailed ones, which was his way of saying, "I trust you to do this without my hand on it," which was the kind of trust that means more than any amount of said aloud. Patricia worked beside her every day. They set up in the smaller conference room on the 38th floor and covered the walls with the financial structure of Harrington Realty, every layer of it, the debt and the assets and the personnel and the contracts and the Mountain West expansion in all its over-leveraged specificity. Emily had not known walking into this exactly how bad the situation was. She understood it now with the comprehensive clarity of someone who has read every page rather than the summary. It was bad, not unsurvivable, but the margin between bad and unsurvivable was narrow enough that the path through it required precision, and it required honesty, and it required the kind of decisions that could not be made by people who were still more invested in protecting their own position than in protecting the company, which meant the first real obstacle was a man named Gerald Fitch. Gerald Fitch was not a Gerald like Nathan's Gerald. He was the chief operating officer of Harrington Realty, a position he had held for 9 years, and he had held it not because he was the best person for the role, but because Claudia had installed him there 6 years ago, when the previous COO had begun asking questions she preferred not to answer. He was competent enough to keep things running, and loyal enough never to look too carefully at the things that shouldn't be running. Emily had identified him in Patricia's file as a problem before she ever met him. She met him on the 4th day. He came to the conference room with 2 of his own people and a set of financial projections that Emily recognized immediately as the optimistic version, the version designed to make the Mountain West numbers look manageable rather than catastrophic. She had the actual numbers in front of her. She had been looking at them for 4 days. She let him present for 12 minutes. Then she set the actual numbers beside his projections and asked him to explain the difference. The silence that followed lasted almost 10 seconds. "Those figures," Fitch said carefully, "reflect a more conservative modeling approach." "These figures," Emily said, tapping the page in front of her, "reflect the actual position of the Mountain West portfolio as of the last quarterly close. I have the underlying documentation. I've spoken to the regional managers directly." She looked at him steadily. "Mr. Fitch, I'm not here to make this easier than it is. I'm here to make it survivable. Those are different goals, and they require different conversations." He looked at the numbers, then at her, then at the numbers again. "Mrs. Harrington," he started. "Whitmore," Emily said. A brief pause. "Ms. Whitmore, I want to be clear that my team has been operating under significant constraints imposed by—" "I know what constraints you were operating under," Emily said, not unkindly, but without softness either. "I know who imposed them and why. That's part of what we're changing." She leaned forward slightly. "Here's what I need from you. I need the real numbers. Every property in the Mountain West portfolio, current valuations, actual debt positions, genuine occupancy rates. Not the version that was being prepared for the January disclosure window. The version that's actually true." She held his gaze. "If you can give me that, you have a role in what comes next. If you can't, we part ways now and I get it from someone else." The silence in the room was the kind that decides things. Fitch looked at her for a long moment. "It'll take 2 days to pull together," he said. "You have 1, Emily said. "Thank you, Mr. Fitch." He left with his people, and the moment the conference room door closed, Patricia looked at Emily across the table and said, "Where did that come from?" 3 years of watching Claudia Harrington run meetings, Emily said. "I was paying attention even when she didn't know I was." Patricia laughed. "Short and real." 2 days later, one more than Emily had given him, which told her something about his habits, Fitch delivered the actual numbers. They were, as she had suspected, significantly worse than the presented version. They were also, now that they were real and on the table, workable. You could not build a recovery on comfortable fiction. You could build one on an honest accounting of exactly how bad things were, because at least then you knew what you were actually dealing with. Emily spent that evening going through the numbers with Nathan. "The Mountain West can be partially salvaged," she said. 3 of the 7 properties are viable with restructured financing. The other 4 need to be sold cleanly and quickly before the market figures out the depth of the distress. She pushed the analysis across the table. The sale proceeds combined with the Whitmore capital infusion cover the primary debt exposure. It leaves the company lean but solvent. Nathan studied the numbers. "You've thought about this very carefully," he said. "I've thought about almost nothing else for 10 days. He looked up. "Emily, this is a strong plan. This is a genuinely strong plan." "I know," she said, not arrogantly, as a statement of fact which was something she was allowing herself more of. "Your grandfather would have—" "You said that before," she said. "It bears repeating," Nathan said. She almost smiled. What do you think about the governance structure, specifically the board composition? They worked through it together until 11 that night. The board had to change. That was non-negotiable. It was part of the settlement framework, the removal of the people whose judgment had produced the current crisis. But change had to be managed. You didn't pull the structural supports of a company in distress without having something ready to replace them, or the whole thing came down faster. Emily had identified 3 people within the Harrington organization itself who could step into expanded roles. Daniel had helped with this as she had asked him to. He had done it without resistance and without trying to protect people he personally liked who were not actually performing. That surprised her slightly. She had expected more of the old instinct, the managed loyalty, the preference for comfortable relationships over correct decisions. What she got instead was someone doing what she had asked, looking at the organization honestly and telling her the truth about what he saw. It was, she thought, possibly the first genuinely honest thing they had done together in 3 years. On the 11th day, something she had not anticipated happened. She was in the conference room at 7 in the morning, earlier than anyone else, working through the final sale documentation on the 4 Mountain West properties when her phone rang. It was Senator Robert Langley. She looked at his name on the screen for 2 rings. Then she answered. "Senator Langley," she said. "Ms. Whitmore." His voice was measured and precise. The voice of a man who had spent 40 years in political environments where every word is potentially consequential and has learned to deploy language with surgical care. "I appreciate you taking my call." "What can I do for you, Senator?" "I believe we have matters to discuss," he said, "relating to certain arrangements that were made on behalf of our respective families that have been overtaken by recent developments." She almost appreciated the phrasing. Arrangements overtaken by recent developments. The political way of saying everything collapsed, and I'd like to discuss what happens to the pieces. "Your investment office had a commitment to the Harrington restructuring in a particular form," Emily said. "That form no longer exists." "Yes," he said. "The new form is Whitmore-led. The terms are different." She looked at her notes. "If your office is interested in a role in the restructured entity, the conversation is available. On the new terms." A pause. "You're not excluding us," he said. There was something in his voice, not surprise exactly, but the particular quality of a man who has prepared for one kind of conversation and found himself in a different one. "I'm not interested in excluding anyone who adds genuine value," Emily said. "I'm interested in excluding arrangements made in bad faith." She paused. "The arrangement your office made 9 months ago was made in bad faith. That arrangement is over. If you want to discuss a new one based on actual terms with full transparency on both sides, I'm open to that conversation." The silence that followed was longer than she expected. "Victoria tells me," he said slowly, "that you are remarkably direct." "I've been told that before," Emily said. "I take it as a compliment." "It was intended as one." Another pause. "Ms. Whitmore, I would like to have that conversation, the real one, at your convenience." "Have your office contact Gerald," Emily said. "He'll schedule it." She ended the call. She set the phone down and sat for a moment in the early morning quiet, thinking about the 9-month letter of intent and the Christmas dinner it had been designed to produce, and the fact that now, 11 days later, the man who had signed that letter was calling her office to request a meeting on her terms. She wrote the time of the call on her legal pad. Then she went back to the sale documentation. The January deadline arrived on a Tuesday. The financial disclosures went out through the proper channels, complete and accurate for the first time, carrying in them the full picture of Harrington Realty's position, the shortfall, the debt, the Mountain West exposure, and alongside all of that, the restructuring framework already in place, the new capital committed, the governance changes already partially implemented. The people who received those disclosures had been expecting a collapse. What they got instead was a controlled landing. Carol called Emily at 9:15 that morning. "The divorce is finalized," she said. Emily stopped walking. She was in the corridor between the conference room and her temporary office mid-step, and she simply stopped. "It's done," she said. "Signed by both parties as of 8:57 this morning. Daniel's counsel was cooperative throughout. The settlement terms we established hold in full. The photograph fraud acknowledgement is formally on record." A pause. "It's done, Emily." She stood in the corridor. It was done. 3 years. The marriage, the contempt, the Christmas dinner, the wrist, the photographs, the snow, the phone, her father's voice. All of it was now behind a line marked January 7th, 8:57 in the morning, formally concluded. "Thank you, Carol," she said. "You did the work," Carol said. "I just made sure the record reflected it." After the call, Emily went into the small office and closed the door and sat at the desk for exactly 4 minutes. She did not cry. She had thought she might. Instead, what she felt was something more quiet than tears, a deep and genuine stillness. The specific kind that comes when something you have been carrying for a long time is finally set down for good, and you feel for the first time the actual weight of it now that it's gone. She thought about the woman she had been 3 years ago, driving away from her father's world with a suitcase and a set of principles, and the genuine belief that love could exist outside of context if you were only brave enough to find it. She had been right about that belief. She still believed it. She had simply been wrong about the specific man. That was allowed. You could be wrong about a specific man and still be right about love. She wrote in her legal pad, January 7th, "Done." Then she stood up, opened the office door, and walked back into the corridor. She had work to do. The first board meeting of the restructured entity happened 3 weeks later on a clear, cold morning in late January. The new board sat around the same conference table where Emily had spent much of the past month, but it looked different now. The walls were clear, the financial projections on the screens were the real ones, and the faces were different. Some familiar from within the organization, and some new people brought in for their competence rather than their loyalty to any particular family interest. Daniel sat in a chair that was no longer at the head of the table. He had a role in the restructured company, a real one, operational, focused on the client relationships he was genuinely good at, insulated from the governance and strategic decisions that had been his undoing. Emily had proposed it. He had accepted it without arguing for something bigger, which told her that Daniel Harrington, when stripped of his mother's architecture and the pressure of the social performance she required of him, was capable of a kind of honest self-assessment he had not been capable of before. She did not know what that would eventually add up to for him. That was not her calculation to make. But she had not excluded him. That had been a real choice, and she had made it with her eyes open. The board meeting lasted 3 hours. Emily chaired it. She had not expected to feel comfortable in that chair, and she did not completely. There was still a part of her that was waiting for someone to question her right to be there, which was the residue of 3 years of being told without words that she did not belong in rooms like this one. She noticed the residue. She did not let it change her behavior. She ran the meeting, the way she ran everything, completely precisely with an ear for what was actually being said underneath what was being said, and a directness that had, over the past month, become her signature in every room she entered. When the meeting ended, the new CFO, a woman named Helen Marsh, who had been buried 3 levels deep in the old structure and had been doing excellent work there without recognition for 5 years, stopped Emily in the corridor. "I wanted to say something," Helen said. She was direct in her own right. Emily had noticed that about her from the first conversation. "I've been at this company for 8 years. The last 5 of those years I've known exactly what was wrong with how it was being run. I wrote analysis after analysis that went nowhere because the people at the top didn't want the actual picture. They wanted the comfortable one." She looked at Emily. "You asked for the real picture on day 1. Do you know how rare that is?" "I know how expensive the alternative is," Emily said. "Yes," Helen said. "You do." A pause. "Thank you. For what it's worth, from someone who was invisible in this organization until 3 weeks ago, thank you." Emily looked at her. She thought about invisible, about the specific experience of being competent and present and unseen. She knew what that felt like from the inside, had known it for 3 years, had carried it in her body in ways that had taken the better part of a month to begin releasing. "You're not invisible anymore," she said. "Make the most of it." Helen nodded, walked away. Emily stood in the corridor alone for a moment. It was the kind of moment that arrives when you are in the middle of something large and you pause long enough to feel its size. Not proudly, not with triumph, just honestly, the way you stand in a room you have built and turn slowly and think, "This is real, and I made it, and what I made is real." Claudia Harrington had not been present at the board meeting. She had not been in any of the restructuring meetings. Her formal role in the company, which had never been a titled role, but had been a comprehensive and controlling one nonetheless, was over. The regulatory process related to the financial transfers was ongoing. Her lawyer had advised her to be cooperative, and she was being cooperative in the precise and minimal way that Claudia was cooperative with anything she had not chosen. Emily had not seen her since the settlement conference. She had thought about that, about whether there was a conversation to be had beyond the formal ones. She had not decided yet. On a Friday afternoon in early February, she got an answer she hadn't been looking for. She was leaving the building at the end of a long day walking through the lobby when she saw Claudia Harrington standing just inside the front entrance, not waiting for anyone in particular, or at least not visibly. She was simply standing wearing a coat Emily recognized from the Christmas dinner, looking slightly reduced from what she had been, not physically still entirely. Claudia in bearing and composure, but reduced in the sense that the absolute authority of her presence had some air out of it. A balloon that had not fully deflated, but was not at its original pressure. They saw each other at the same moment. Neither moved for a beat. Then Claudia said, "I was in the neighborhood." And they both understood that this was not entirely true, and both understood that neither of them was going to say so. "Do you want to come up?" Emily said. Claudia looked at her. "I won't stay long." They went up together in the elevator, not to the residence, to a smaller conference room on a lower floor, which felt like the right register. Not too formal, not too personal, something in between. They sat across from each other without lawyers, without notes, without the architecture of formal proceedings around them. Emily waited. Claudia was quiet for a moment, looking at her hands on the table in front of her. This was unusual. Claudia did not look at her hands. She looked at people at rooms at the elements she was assessing. Looking at her hands was something she did when she was organizing words she was not sure she had the right to say. "My husband died when Daniel was 14, Claudia said finally. Emily had known this. It was in the family history documented. "I know," she said. "What nobody knows," Claudia said, still looking at her hands, "is that when he died, the company was in serious trouble. Not the same kind of trouble as now. Worse. We were within 4 months of losing everything. I had a 14-year-old son, and a company that was going to be taken from us, and a family name that was the only currency I had left." She looked up. "I rebuilt it, myself. It took 6 years, and I made choices during those 6 years that I would not make now. But I made them, and the company survived, and Daniel grew up with the life I intended him to have." Emily listened. "I built something," Claudia said. "I built it alone, and then I became so afraid of losing it that I started treating everything around me as either a support or a threat, including people." A long pause. "Including you." The room was very quiet. "I was not kind to you," Claudia said. The words came out with the specific difficulty of someone who does not often speak directly about their own failures. "I was not fair. I treated you as a liability from the first day, and I looked for evidence to support that, and I found it where it didn't exist and manufactured it where I couldn't find it. And—" She stopped. "There is no version of that that is acceptable. I know that." Emily looked at her. This was the conversation that could not have happened in a conference room. This was the thing that existed underneath the fraud acknowledgement and the regulatory cooperation and the formal record. The human underneath the machine. "Why are you telling me this?" Emily said, not unkindly, genuinely asking. "Because you're running the company," Claudia said. "Because every week I hear about something you've done that I should have done and didn't, and I need you to know that I see it, that it doesn't go unnoticed by me even now." A pause. "And because I think I owe you the explanation. Not the justification. There's no justification, but the explanation." Emily sat with this. She thought about the woman across from her. 40 years of control, a company rebuilt alone, a son protected at any cost, the particular hardness that forms over a person when they have survived something by becoming something and cannot then figure out how to stop being it. She did not forgive Claudia in that room. Forgiveness was not something that happened in a single afternoon, whatever movies suggested. It was a longer process, something you chose and then chose again across time, an act of will more than an act of feeling. But she understood something she had not fully understood before. "You were afraid?" Emily said. "Yes." "You have been afraid for a very long time." "Yes." Emily looked at her steadily. "I can't give you back what this cost. You understand that." "I'm not asking for that." "What are you asking for?" Claudia was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said. And the honesty of that, the simple admission that she had walked in without a fully formed ask, that she had come because she needed to come, was the most human thing Emily had ever heard from her. "Then start there," Emily said. That's a better starting point than most people find. They sat for a while longer. Not comfortably, it was not that yet and might never be. But honestly, without the performance that had characterized every previous interaction, just two people in a room looking at the damage between them and deciding independently and without agreement that they were not going to look away from it. When Claudia left, Emily sat alone in the small conference room for a while. She was thinking about the Christmas decorations she had spent 3 weeks sourcing, the burgundy ribbon, the candles. She was thinking about how much of herself she had poured into those 3 years, trying to make herself belong somewhere she was not wanted, trying to make something good out of a structure that had been designed to exclude her. She had always been pouring herself into the wrong container. The company she was building now, the restructured, honest, functional version of what Harrington Realty could actually be, that was the right container. The people she was pulling out of invisibility, the ones like Helen who had been doing excellent unseen work for years, those were the right people. The work she was doing every morning at 5:30 with a legal pad and a coffee, and her cousin beside her and her father 2 floors above, that was the right work. It had taken a Christmas dinner and a bruised wrist and a phone she carried for 3 years to get here. She would not say it was worth it. That would be the wrong way to frame it. She would say instead that she had survived it fully and had come out of it knowing exactly who she was, and that was something nobody could take from her now, not because she was powerful enough to prevent it, but because she finally understood her own worth clearly enough that any attempt to diminish it would simply fail to find purchase. She picked up her phone. She called her father. He answered on the first ring the way he always did. "How was the board meeting?" he said. "Strong," she said. "Helen Marsh is remarkable. We need to make sure her compensation reflects that." "Already in process," he said, and she could hear the smile in it. Not surprised. Never quite surprised by her anymore. "Dad," she said. "Yes." She paused. "Thank you. Not just for the calls and the lawyers and the framework, for the room, for keeping the room ready." A silence. "Always," he said. Just that word, simple and absolute and completely true. She ended the call. She gathered her things. She walked out of the conference room and through the corridor and into the elevator and down through the 42 floors and out through the lobby and through the front doors into the February air, cold and clean and entirely honest in its coldness, making no promises about warmth it wasn't ready to deliver. She walked. She thought about the next day's work and the week after that and the months ahead, the real work of rebuilding something that had been run badly for a long time, the patience it required, the precision, the willingness to make decisions that were correct, even when they were uncomfortable to tell the truth, even when the comfortable version was available to protect the people who were invisible until they weren't anymore. She thought about the lesson the Harrington family had spent 3 years failing to learn and had finally, at considerable cost to themselves, begun to understand. That kindness is not weakness, that silence is not the absence of power, that the person you have decided does not belong in your world may be the very person your world cannot survive without, and that sometimes all it takes to change everything is the courage to make one call, not to ask for rescue, not to admit defeat, but to say finally and out loud, and to the one person who had always been waiting to hear it, "I know who I am. I am ready to stop pretending otherwise." Emily Whitmore walked through the cold February afternoon with her legal pad under her arm and her father's number in her phone and 14 days of real work behind her and everything that came next still ahead, and she was not afraid of any of it. She never had been. That was the thing they had never understood about her, the thing she had always known and had simply been waiting in her patient and precise and absolutely certain way for the right moment to show them. She had never been afraid. She had only been waiting, and now she was done waiting.